4 years, that's what a federal judge gave him. Prosecutors wanted 8. He'd stolen data on 70 million people, and the judge still cut the sentence in half. 10 million teachers, 60 million children, some as young as 5 years old, their personal records exposed, prosecutors say, for the rest of their lives. His name is Matthew Lane, 20 years old, from Massachusetts. He'd already pleaded guilty by the time he sat in front of the judge, admitting to a cyber attack that would become one of the most consequential in American education history. This wasn't a first offense. Prosecutors say Lane's cybercriminal activity dated back to 2021, 3 years before the PowerSchool breach. He was a teenager when it apparently started. By the time he hit his target, he was practiced, deliberate. His target was PowerSchool, a California-based education software company. It's one of the dominant vendors in the American K-12 market, managing student records, grades, attendance, and personal data for school districts across the country, a single company holding the files of tens of millions of children. September 2024, Lane didn't need a sophisticated exploit. He used the stolen credentials of a PowerSchool contractor, someone with legitimate access, to walk straight through the front door. No 0-day, no elaborate intrusion chain, just a borrowed key. Once inside, he pulled everything. Records belonging to nearly 70 million students and teachers, swept out of PowerSchool systems in a single operation. Prosecutors would later call it the single largest breach of American school children's data on record. One contractor's login, tens of millions of lives exposed, 60 million children, 10 million teachers. Some of those kids were as young as 5 years old when their data was taken. According to prosecutors, every one of them now faces a risk of identity theft for the remainder of their lives. That's not a headline. That's a life sentence for the victims. 3 months passed. Then in December 2024, PowerSchool received the demand. Lane threatened to release the data publicly if the company didn't pay. The message was simple: hand over the money, or 70 million records hit the open market. His asking price, nearly $2.9 million, paid in cryptocurrency. PowerSchool didn't negotiate. They transferred the funds, believing that would be the end of it. PowerSchool paid the ransom, but paying didn't close the wound. Between the breach response legal costs and the downstream fallout, the company absorbed more than $14 million in total financial losses. The ransom was just the opening bill. And then it got worse. Paying the ransom didn't make the data disappear. Multiple school districts, PowerSchool's own customers, started receiving their own extortion demands tied to the exact same stolen records. The data was still out there, and someone was still using it. PowerSchool wasn't even his only victim. Court documents also reference an undisclosed U.S. telecommunications company among his targets. The full scope of what Lane hit may never be fully public. The case landed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts. Matthew Lane pleaded guilty, no trial, no contest, a full admission to the cyber attack on PowerSchool and everything that followed from it. Federal prosecutors didn't go easy. They pushed for 8 years, twice what Lane received. Their argument, this wasn't a one-time lapse. Lane's cybercriminal activity ran back to 2021, and the government had serious concerns. He remained in denial about the scope of what he'd done and the threat he still posed. Prosecutors didn't just argue for 8 years in the abstract. They pointed to real cases. Hackers who received lighter sentences walked out of prison and immediately returned to cybercrime. The pattern was clear. Leniency, they argued, had already failed the system once. Don't let it fail again. Judge Margaret Guzman delivered her ruling: 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Half of what prosecutors asked for, but still a significant sentence for a 20-year-old who'd never faced a courtroom before. On top of prison time, Lane was ordered to pay almost $14.1 million in restitution and a $25,000 fine. That covers losses tied to both the PowerSchool breach and the separate telecom attack. Here's the uncomfortable truth about the money. Lane forfeited only about $161,000 that investigators could trace. Around $3 million in illicit proceeds is still unaccounted for. Most of what he made from this is simply gone. Prosecutors put it plainly, the money he returned was barely 1% of the financial damage he caused. Matthew Lane is required to surrender to the Federal Bureau of Prisons by December 1st. The largest breach of American student data in history, closed out by a 20-year-old handing himself over to federal custody.